Coming up on Lawmakers, the House passes a controversial bill that changes child support regulations in Georgia for the first time in 20 years. A bill that limits condemnation of property for economic development purposes passes the Senate. And the House passes the reapportionment bill that redraws Georgia's congressional map. Those stories and more are next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers for Thursday, March 10th. Here are your anchors, Wandi Lawson and Gerald Bryant.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gerald Bryant, and Wandi Lawson is on assignment and will be joining us later in the broadcast. Also on tonight's program, unincorporated Sandy Springs is one step closer to becoming a city, and more consumer protection in the wake of the Choicepoint scandal. But our top story tonight changes to Georgia's child support laws. Well, apparently we do not have that story yet. Let's go to this next story, and it deals with eminent domain, which continues to be a hot topic at the General Assembly. Today, the Senate passed a bill saying government could not use its power to seize private property solely or primarily to improve the tax base or for economic development. Here's Senator Jeff Chapman, sponsor of Senate Bill 86.
Senate Bill 86 will ensure that the citizens of our state are never removed from their homes or businesses because of an abuse of eminent domain. Unfortunately, some local governments across the nation have been using eminent domain to force people off their lands so that private developers can build more expensive homes and offices that can pay more in property taxes. Obtaining property for such purposes is using eminent domain for private profit, not public use.
Now, there was some opposition from senators who said the bill would hamper needed redevelopment projects. Senator Doug Stoner talked about his experience in Smyrna.
We actually had 30 pieces of property in our downtown, and we had 5 property owners who refused to sell. Now, if they know they don't have any real threat of having to come to the table to negotiate on market value, then they won't. And that's the issue. We're required to offer market value, a fair market price. And our experience has been is if you don't have to come, you're going to ask more than fair market value. In fact, you'll have the ability to extort the taxpayers.
Now, Minority Leader Robert Brown supported Senate Bill 86, but cautioned against changes in the House or in a conference committee.
This bill could come back with some spandex, lipstick, and it would be totally different from what it left here about. Don't be bedeviled by it going over to the House and somebody saying, well, I heard that there was something that you guys over in the Senate wanted to improve on this bill, and we just make this one little change, and it ends up going into a conference committee, and it comes out with all this lipstick on the pig. Don't kiss it. And if you hear me say, oink, oink, it's a bad bill.
Senate Bill 86 passed 40-10 and goes to the House. After the vote, I talked with Senator John Wiles, who sponsors SB 276, an eminent domain bill aimed at limiting how school boards acquire property.
With Senate Bill 86 passing the Senate, perhaps 276, will put back that balance where it's your property, not the government's property, and the government's only going to be able to take your property when it absolutely has to have it, and after it's looked at all alternatives. Condemnation should be the last resort, not the first resort where it is now.
Senate Bill 276 was inspired by a much-publicized situation in Cobb County, where the school board was, until recently, looking into acquiring property owned by a retired couple. Well, a consumer protection bill that would combat identity theft is one step closer to becoming law in Georgia. The Senate passed a bill that would require companies to inform consumers if their personal information was compromised by a breach in security. Lawmakers Chriss Knight joins us live from the Capitol with more on the passage of Senate Bill 230. Chris.
Well, Gerald, Senate Bill 230 passed unopposed in the Senate. The legislation comes in light of recent reports of a fraud ring acquiring personal information from nearly 140,000 consumers from computer databases maintained by Choicepoint Incorporated. The California company was required by law to inform its consumers of this breach in security. Georgia does not have such a law, but Senator Bill Hamrick hopes to change that.
We've worked very quickly to put together a bill that would require companies like that to notify people who've had their information obtained in an unauthorized way. So it just requires these companies to notify people when that has happened so people can take steps to try to prevent identity theft.
And as I mentioned earlier, the state of California is currently the only state with such a law protecting consumers. Senator Bill Hamrick says Senate Bill 230 is based on California's law.
We just kind of quickly researched that law and utilized it as the foundation for ours, knowing that it had probably been tested a little bit and seemed to work fairly well. And I believe that's the law that prompted the company to notify people, so we just felt like Georgia should be on equal footing and have the same protection for our consumers.
And Senator Hamrick says that so far Senate Bill 230 has met little, if any, opposition from legislators or business across the state. Senate Bill 230 passed by a vote of 52-0. The bill now heads over to the House. Reporting live, I'm Chriss Knight for Lawmakers.
Thank you very much, Chris. Meanwhile, a bill that aims to put driver's education courses back into every Georgia public high school passed in the Senate today. Senate Bill 226, called Joshua's Law, would require a 16-year-old applying for a driver's license to first pass a driver's education course. The legislation would establish a board who would accept public and private donations, which would go towards placing driver simulators in schools. Senate Bill 226 passed with an amendment that would push the date of enacting the law from July 2006 to January 2007. Senator Preston Smith is the author of that bill.
And I do support making sure that we can fund the program, put it in place, make it available, and then make the requirement that they have that before they get their license. And so I don't oppose that in theory. My hope was that we could keep a little bit shorter deadlines so that we keep the pressure on everybody to put the program in place, raise the money, and all of that. And the reason why I had placed a July 1st, 2006 deadline was to make sure in the next legislative session, if we need to extend it, we could. But they saw fit to extend that 6 months today, and that's okay. The key is the bill is moving forward, and that's what we're looking forward to.
Senate Bill 226 passed by a vote of 50-3. The bill now heads over to the House. In other news, legislation that provides education-related financial assistance, for Georgians in the National Guard passed the Senate today. Senate Bill 43, known as the HEROES Package, is a bipartisan effort to aid Georgia's military reserves and their families in return for services they provide. David Zelski joins us live with the Capitol with more on that story. David.
Well, thanks, Gerald. Republican Senator John Wiles sponsors Senate Bill 43, which would help pay college tuition for children of those who are on duty more than 180 days. Another part of the bill, added by Democratic Senator Ed Harbison, gives financial aid to those who, after serving the 180 days, want an education for themselves.
What my bill says is, if you're a Georgia resident, be it a guardsman or reservist, and you're deployed into a combat zone for 181 days, any of your children that are alive or on the way will be able to go to any Georgia public or private college or technical college and have a $2,000 scholarship when they attend that private college, public college, or technical school when they get college age.
Senate Bill 61 basically provides tuition grants to returning National Guard members. The tuition program would permit members to update their employment skills to ease back into the workforce, and I think that is extremely worthwhile. They would get $2,000 for any soldier in the Georgia Air and Army National Guard who is on active duty or honorably discharged and has 181 days or more of consecutive service. They can receive the grant for up to 4 years and get up to a cap of $8,000.
Now, Lieutenant Governor Mark Taylor also has a HEROES package with a few additional incentives for the reservists. However, part of his package was Senator Harbison's addition to Senate Bill 43, which again passed unanimously and now heads to the House. Reporting live, I'm David Zelski for Lawmakers.
Before you go, David, how many Georgians serve in the National Guard currently?
Well, Gerald, that's about 12,000, and 4,000 of those are in the Middle East as we speak, and also recruiting numbers are down about 30% this year from expectations.
All right, David, thank you very much.
And the State Senate today passed a bill aimed at assisting parents of young children to help their kids get an early start in education. Here's Senator Preston Smith.
This bill will direct the Department of Early Care and Learning to develop and implement a plan to provide tools and opportunities for parents and teachers to help children succeed with educational tools for those very early years between the ages of 2 and 5. It is a voluntary program. It does not mandate that any parent in Georgia participate in it, but it does ultimately make those tools available to the parents to help those parents participate and support their children's early learning initiatives and experiences.
Senate Bill 1 passed 51-0 and now moves to the House.
Well, the area of Sandy Springs took a big step today towards becoming a city. The House passed House Bills 36 and 37, which are companion pieces of legislation that would provide for a referendum for the people of the area to vote on incorporation. Lawmakers Jesse Freeman is live at the Capitol with more on that story. Jesse.
Thank you, Gerald. The House did pass both of the necessary pieces of legislation to provide for a vote on incorporation. Much of the debate today came from members of the Fulton delegation, many of whom want to avoid the vote and the financial hit that the county stands to take.
What you have here is less than 1%. Less than 1% of the amount of tax that comes into Fulton County is being addressed by this change.
We're talking not about, just a small hit. We're talking about $7 million from the loss, an additional tax increase of $27 million to replace those lost services. So you can see then why we object.
Fulton County taxes and spends its residents more than double per resident what Cobb County does.
The existing governing body for Fulton County, which includes the which includes the area known as Sandy Springs, has decided against the city of Sandy Springs being incorporated.
Oh yes, you're talking about the Fulton County Commission.
That is correct.
Probably the most dysfunctional form of government in Georgia, but yes, they passed a resolution saying they were not in favor of, in fact, the corporation of this city.
It is not often that we get to sit here and provide greater freedom and greater liberty immediately to 86,000 people. But today, you have that opportunity.
And some members of the Fulton delegation wanted to see all of Fulton County vote on that referendum that would be held in June. As it stands now, just the residents of the area of Sandy Springs would vote because an amendment that would provide for that change failed. The bills now head to the Senate. Reporting live, I'm Jesse Freeman for Lawmakers.
Interesting story. Thank you, Jesse.
Well, the House today adopted the first revision to state child support guidelines in 2 decades. Debate surrounded whether or not it would be fair to have both parents, the non-custodial and custodial parent, contribute their income to that child support equation, and also surrounded whether or not there should be financial incentives for parents to spend time with their children.
We are not establishing new guidelines outside the boundaries of what is already in existence around this country.
I'm not arguing the concept of income shares. I'm just questioning the concept that we're currently using. Is it not true?
In your opinion, but I think that the committee felt the Tennessee model was, that's the one they wanted to model after for Georgia.
And isn't it, and given the fact that we're modeling after something that we don't yet have any data on, isn't it true that possibly we should proceed with caution and wait until next year before passing this bill when we can amass some data to look at whether it's an effective model or whether we need to make changes and going ahead with our legislation?
That is why we've established a commission to be in place from the signing of this bill until January 1st to look at that. We have had models to change our child support guidelines, the way we do it in this state, for a number of years. I know, at least since I was here and previously, and that's been 5 years, and we keep delaying this year after year after year. And I think as long as we have a commission working on this for the next 9 months or more, we can certainly put something in place, and they can always make amendments or recommend changes to this if they so choose.
Now, the House adopted the measure by a vote of 127 to 43. It now moves over to the Senate. And Senate President Pro Tem Eric Johnson says Senate Bill 19, legislation passed by the Senate today, will close a loophole in Georgia law that regulates class action lawsuits.
On the incentives and what the jobs you create that will allow you to bring in this tax credit to your existing businesses. This is a small business initiative that we feel like is good for the state of Georgia. There are some tax incentives. If you're talking about when we start looking at there's investment tax credits, There's R&D tax credit, there's job training, retraining tax credit, there's headquarter tax credits, and all here for the state of Georgia for our existing industries as well.
Will the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it not true then that, are we giving an additional amount to businesses for creating more jobs or for the same jobs? Because is it not true that we already give businesses tax credits for creating jobs?
Well, this bill it allows for new jobs created in order to get this tax credit, and there again it goes by the tier system.
And we apologize for running that incorrect cut. Of course, that was legislation as a part of Governor Sonny Perdue's economic development program. Tax incentives for small businesses passed the House today. In addition, the sales tax holiday, which we've come to have for the past 2 years, also passed the House today. As it was explained by the bill's sponsor, it's yet another way to entice consumers out during the back-to-school season.
Most of you that have been here the last 2 sessions understand this is the sales tax holiday, and the majority of you voted on it before. I would ask for your favorable consideration of this bill. It only changes the time this year to make it specific to a weekend.
And, of course, we will be having that sales tax holiday should the measure make it through the Senate as well and be signed by the governor. That will, of course, cover clothing items, computer items, and other back-to-school items. Now, back to the tape we tried to show you earlier. Senate President Pro Tem Eric Johnson, who says that Senate Bill 19, legislation passed by the Senate today, will close a loophole in the Georgia law that regulates class action lawsuits.
These are the types of cases where consumers get a coupon or $1.50 or a free Blockbuster rental certificate while the lawyers get tens and 20 millions of dollars. This bill then has 3 proposed fixes. The first is that there is a mandatory stay on a class action lawsuit until there is a determination of the class. That is far less expensive for the 2 parties to do their discovery on and have their trial on, and it helps the plaintiff and the defendant to know whether or not there's a class before they start the trial. The second thing that it does is it requires the courts to issue a written decision on why the class is certified or decertified so that the appeals courts have some understanding of what the lower court's decision was. And finally, the appeal of class certification is immediate so that you can get that determination before you begin to address the underlying case.
Senate Bill 19 passed 46-4. It now moves to the House.
Also in the Senate today, they passed a bill limiting how state agency heads and state officers can use grants or money from settlement funds. Here's Senator David Schaefer.
It's a bipartisan bill that puts an end to unaccountable slush funds maintained by public officials for their personal or political use and financed by businesses they oversee or regulate. We've recently seen public officials force companies to pay money into settlement funds and then spend that money outside the budget process on programs of dubious value with no oversight at all. Settlement funds created on behalf of the public belong to the public, not to the politicians, and we must not permit those settlement funds to be abused. This bill does not prohibit the creation or legitimate use of settlement funds. What this bill does do is require that public officials who use settlement funds to carry out their public duties must account for those funds in the state budget.
Senate Bill 154 passed 51-0 and goes to the House.
The Georgia-China Alliance introduced Georgia's first China caucus this morning. Now, this caucus is intended to increase Chinese-American political participation as well as to emphasize China's emergence into the global economy. Senator Sam Zamariva expressed his support.
As everyone knows, China presents an enormous economic opportunity, not just for Georgia, but for the entire world. It's a leading economic engine in the globe, and there are many historic ties that are very important, not just to Georgia, but to our country. But here in Georgia, those ties include the Coca-Cola Company, United Parcel Service, the General Electric Corporation, and Home Depot, as well as many, many others that are not household names. These companies increasingly are doing a large amount of business in China, both in direct trade and investment.
For more information about Georgia's relationship with China, visit www.georgiachina.com.
Well, Governor Sonny Perdue, who is a veterinarian by training, neutered a 9-month-old dog named Nelson today at the Atlanta Humane Society. The event was to encourage Georgians to spay and neuter their pets, as well as recognize the Humane Society's 132nd anniversary.
The governor, a licensed veterinarian, gave recommendations for controlling the pet population.
Fortunately, there are several ways that Georgians can help this problem. The first is to be first and foremost a responsible pet owner yourself and to have your animals spayed or neutered. A second way is to help support your local animal shelter and organizations like the Atlanta Humane Society. Another way Georgians can help is to purchase the special tag, the dog and cat license plates for your vehicle, as I'm wearing on my lab coat here today. This tag supports Georgia's statewide spay and neuter program.
As for Nelson,
I venture to say that there will be a rush to get Nelson because, as the governor says, everybody wants to say, the governor is my pet's physician. Just as soon as Nelson has recovered and goes up for adoption, we anticipate a stampede.
Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Sean Yancey.
Well, yesterday, Governor Sonny Perdue awarded a group of children who successfully used the 911 phone number in a time of emergency. Lawmakers Chriss Knight has more on 911 Appreciation Day at the Capitol.
7 youngsters proudly display a medal they received for successfully using 911 in time of an emergency, including Joshua Phillips and his sister Emily. These two know the importance of calling 911.
Because if you want to get your mommy up, then you have to call 911 to help your mom.
It actually was in the middle of the night. I went into a diabetic coma, and the next morning I guess I was trying to get out of the bed and hit the floor, just still unconscious, and they came in and couldn't wake me up.
Governor Sonny Perdue presented the children with a medal honoring their courageous acts.
Those 3 digits mean help when things go wrong. And we're very proud to have these 7 young Georgians with us who responded in a crisis by picking up the phone and making that life-saving call, and you dialed what? There you go.
I had passed out, and she couldn't wake me up, so she dialed 911.
How did you know to call 911?
My mama helped me.
I'm very honored. I was glad to know that her only being 3 years old, that she knew and she understood, and my teaching wasn't in vain.
And 7-year-old Megan Lime plans to do some teaching herself.
I have a brother, but he's only 3. He's going to go in preschool.
Are you going to teach him the importance of calling 911?
Mm-hmm.
These 7 children prove that heroes come in all different sizes. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Chriss Knight.
A bill which would substantially revise the proceedings of criminal trials passed out of the House Judiciary Committee on Friday. Lawmakers' Michael Riddle has more on House Bill 170.
After several revisions and much debate, the Criminal Justice Act of 2005 received a due-pass recommendation, but not without strong opposition. Representative Tom Bordeaux argued that the proposed changes to the jury selection process and closing arguments were unfair.
Prosecution gets the first closing, as it does now, gets to advance its case. The defendant gets the next closing, gets to make its case and make its defense. And then the prosecution gets the final word, but only in rebuttal to what the defendant has argued. We'll have, by implication, rejected that. To me, that seems fair.
The act would change admission standards for evidence, allowing past unrelated convictions to be admitted as evidence against the accused's character.
This bill is a serious erosion of people's civil liberties. Frankly, I don't trust the government. I don't trust the government to do the right things. That's why we have laws and constitutions in place. This bill seriously weakens those constitutional, those statutory protections. In large part, it allows the prosecutor to take a criminal conviction from decades earlier and use it to convict you of the crime you're accused of now, even though the crimes are totally unrelated. It's not fair.
House Bill 170 was proposed by Representative Rich Golick, the governor's floor leader, and now heads to the House for its final reading. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Michael Riddle.
Well, the House got started this morning with some words from civil rights icon. The Reverend Joseph Lowry was the pastor of the day today in the House. He took the occasion to remind the representatives that it was the 40th anniversary of the Selma, Alabama Civil Rights March, and that they should look to support the Voting Rights and other civil rights acts.
Tyrone mentioned we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery, which gave birth to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And portions of that act expire in 2007, having been extended the last time in 1982, when I led a march again from Alabama to Washington to free two women who had been arrested for voter fraud. Their only crime was trying to help elderly and ill people cast absentee ballots. But we got them free and also extended the act until 2007. I hope that this body will consider a resolution at the proper time urging the Congress to extend those portions which expire, because without that act, there are several distinguished members of this body, Representative Brooks and others, who would not be here had it not been for the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Can I get an amen on that?
And Representative Tyrone Brooks has introduced a resolution encouraging Congress to, in fact, renew that Voting Rights Act. Well, coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, the FY06 budget is expected to be in the full Senate, Appropriations Committee that is, and the Senate is expected to take up a bill that would allow the prosecution to have equal jury strikes in court. We'll have those stories and all the latest for Under the Gold Dome tomorrow night at 7 p.m. This Saturday, March 12th, be sure to tune in for a special edition of Lawmakers from 10 a.m. until noon. We'll be bringing you live coverage of Family Day at the Capitol. That's Saturday from 10 a.m. until noon, right here on Georgia Public Broadcasting. And if you missed any part of this program, be sure to tune in when Lawmakers repeats tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. And next up, we have Prep Sports Plus. That program is coming up next here on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
And we both have the flu. I'm getting late word that Senate Resolution 49, the so-called Faith and Family, an amendment to the state constitution, which would allow public funds to go to faith-based organizations that provide social services for the government, is on the Senate calendar tomorrow. And the main objection to those who oppose that is the possibility of school vouchers, which they say is hidden in there. So that's something else we'll have on the broadcast tomorrow. That is our broadcast for this, the 29th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Gerald Bryant.
And I'm Wandi Lawson. For all of us here at Lawmakers, we wish you a very, very good night.
Be sure and tune in for that special coverage on Saturday. That should be something very unusual and a chance for you to watch the Georgia General Assembly in action, live, something that doesn't happen very often unless you're watching online. So tune in tomorrow and tune in Saturday. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.